Welcome to Brick by Brick, Building Wealth Through Homeownership. I am Kim Von Dohren, your Realtor.
And I'm your banker, Ed Marko. So we spent the last couple of episodes talking about how to flip a house. And now we're going to talk about how to become a landlord, how to buy something, rehab it, hold it as a rental income for a long period of time. So kind of like the difference between dating and getting married, right?
Yes.
So you're an expert on this. You're a landlord to this day. You're a pretty good landlord, obviously. You've got tenants that stay with you a long time. What's your process like for that?
Well, I am a landlord. I've been a landlord since, actually, I've been a landlord since 2012.
Okay.
So 13 years. And it is definitely different. So for the sake of our conversation, I'll refer to it as a hold and a flip, right?
Okay.
So you did flip. We talked about that for a couple sessions and what that experience is like and how you go about doing that. And it is different to buy a property and hold it, both in what you do, what you choose, things like that. Now, depending on the market, you may not be as discriminating. So I'm going to just kind of make that statement up front. In a market like this where properties are lean and you don't have tons to choose from, you may flip a property you thought you would have only held, and you may hold a property you thought you'd only flip. But, you get the point. Yeah. So, okay. So let's just start talking about going to do my search, right? The search part begins the same as you did, right?
Yeah.
You looked at, you use the multi-listing system, the online places, auctions, door knocking, for sale by owners. These are all ways that you can acquire a property. So that process is the same. So let's assume for a second that I have found a property that I'm interested in and I am considering buying it to keep it. Now, why do I want to keep it? That's a question I think you need to ask yourself. Am I buying the property because I want it to cash flow money every single month? Meaning the rents are more than the costs. And so it's going to cash flow a certain amount of money to me, the landlord, every month that is considered profit. Now, you certainly want it to cash flow.
Right.
Yeah. So you want to have a cash flow. How much it cash flows obviously can vary. And so the other reason you might be doing it is that you may want to purchase it and rent it and hold it so that you are building an asset. So when I say building an asset, I mean that asset may have been purchased with a mortgage. So you may really only own 25% of it, right? Because you had to put 25% down.
Right.
So you only own 25% of it and the bank owns the other 75. So let's say the property isn't cash flowing, but in 10 years, your renter will have paid down your mortgage. While the magic is what, Ed? What also happens?
It's appreciating.
That's right. So the property's going up in value, the mortgage is going down, and somebody else is doing that for you. Someone else is building your equity for you. So even if it isn't cash flowing, you may still want to do a buy and hold, which is why we ended, right? We end our conversation with the flip. Worst case scenario, I got to hold it, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Another time you might want to look at something like that is if you're in a neighborhood where you know this neighborhood is up and coming. Right now, it's priced reasonably. It's not a great big score or anything like that. You're not really going to have a large cash flow. But because of the growth in the area 5-10 years from now, the value of that property might be much higher than it is today. So you're kind of speculating, right?
Right. Yeah. And so the process of going to look and identifying what needs to be rehabbed is the same. That process is the same.
Right.
You're going to see the condition of the property and what work you need to put into it. Now, when you're doing that, what you're looking at that needs to be done versus what I might look at is different.
Right.
So let's talk about the ways in which that might be different. So when I walk into a property and I am considering this as a rental, and there's a lot of nuances, but we're just going to stick with some basics for the moment. I'm looking at this property as a rental. Now, what's the layout? Where is it located? right? So let's actually start first with location. So what are the things you look for in where it's located for a flip?
So, I mean, it's all pretty much basic. School district matters. Is it close to shopping amenities and restaurants? Is there public transportation nearby? I always prefer to buy stuff that's in a town or a city as opposed to something that's 8 miles out of town in the middle of the woods.
Right.
I just want it to be close to where stuff is happening.
Right. Easier sell that way, right? You
Correct.
have a
Yes.
bigger buyer pool
Hmm.
when you have, because there's more people who are interested in easy access and convenience and proximity than there are people who want solitude, which is what you get out of town.
Right. Right.
Not that there isn't a market for that, because there is.
Hmm.
There is a market for people who want to be in a rural home as a renter.
Yeah.
But for now, yes, your primary market for renters is going to be location. So that's important. I'm also looking for, are there schools nearby? Is there shopping nearby? Is there public transportation nearby? All of the same things you mentioned. So location is important. Parking, right?
Yeah.
Because now someone's going to live there. Now, granted, so is an owner, but it's not as much of a problem for you going down the road as it's going to be when someone comes to look at your property and say, oh, there's no place for me to park, or there's only street parking. Sometimes renters don't want that. Sometimes homeowners don't. So that's one of the things I'll look at. Location, parking, and then what type of heat does it have? Now that's, may or may not sound ridiculous, but I will tell you that I know the rental market. And so I think that's one of the things you really have to do is you have to first educate yourself about the rental market, because renters are not buyers. They are a different breed and school of people. I always say if they were going to care for a home, they had perfect credit and assets, they'd be a homeowner, they'd never be your renter. So you can't be expecting to get that as your tenant. These folks are people who either don't manage their money necessarily well, or they're in a transition.
Right.
They don't like responsibility, and they don't want to have to worry that someday the heater may break and it will be theirs.
Right. I was going to say, regardless of any of that, they don't want to do any maintenance. If they wanted to do maintenance, they'd own it.
That's right.
Right.
That's a biggie.
Yeah.
So I always find it quite humorous when landlords put maintenance on their tenants, because if, again, like you said, if they wanted to do maintenance, they'd be homeowners. They would not be your tenant.
Right.
So you really have to be wise about that, because I've sold rental properties where the landlords put the maintenance on the tenants and then it wasn't done. And so things take a beating, deferred maintenance, we call it, on a property when you don't maintain them. So I don't put, as a landlord, I really don't put much maintenance on my tenants at all.
Yeah.
Really. So, okay, then yard. Is there a yard there? I can almost guarantee you every person that comes to me as a prospective tenant has a pet. Every one of them. They all have pets. My husband does not always enjoy that, because there are consequences to having pets,
Right.
They, chew and they go to the bathroom in the house and all of those things. And so he always says, this time we're not going to do any pets. And I always say, that's impossible. And, when I started educating myself about becoming a landlord, one of the things that I was taught by another experienced investor was just plan for that. Assume they're going to have pets and plan for that. So I charge a pet rent. I have changed the way I handle a deposit. So I used to require a pet deposit. Now you just pay me a non-refundable pet fee. If you want to have a pet, it's $500 minimum.
Yeah.
Sometimes $1,000. If you have 2 pets, it's definitely $1,000. Non-refundable. You're never getting that back.
Maybe we'll talk about this a little bit later, but because you have that mindset, I bet that affects the way that you rehab a house, like when it comes to flooring and things like that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. And, yes. So the pets thing is just a thing. It's also pet rent, right?
Mm-hmm.
I charge pet rent. If you go to a multi-unit apartment building,
mm-hmm.
right? One that's a commercial one that's owned by many other businesses. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, like a high-rise building with 60 units in it.
Yeah. Or even, the townhouses and all the, the complexes. always charge pet rent. If they even allow you to have a pet, they're charging pet rent.
Yeah.
And so I just mimic a lot of their behaviors
Okay.
because the expectations are basically the same.
So what do you mean by pet rent? Like if you don't have a pet, the rent's $2,000 a month. If you have a pet, the rent is
$2,035
okay. That's not bad.
per
Okay.
month.
Yeah.
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 It's not bad. And again, they're not willing to give their pets up, of course. I
Right.
understand that.
Right.
And so you either have to buy your own home to have a pet or you have to pay to have that pet in a rental.
So like a dog and a cat and a hamster are looked at the same way as a fish?
No.
Okay.
A dog and a cat,
Mhm.
I'm charging you pet rent. If
Mhm.
it's a hamster in a cage, I'm not charging you pet rent.
Okay.
Okay.
Fish tank, no problem.
Yeah.
What about snakes?
I haven't been asked that one, but if it's in a cage, I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
Oh, goodness. I've not had anybody ask me that question. Yeah, it's funny. I've had buyers.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned my buyer who brought a lizard to a showing because
Yeah. Yeah.
we won't talk about that because we took it in a house. But anyway, so pets are a big thing with renters. You just have to know going into it, there's going to be pets. You can say no pets. I see lots of landlords who say no pets, but it's harder. People. Then, unfortunately, you inspire people to lie. They say they don't have a pet, and then you go there and there's a pet.
Right. What about I've had a couple of landlords tell me in my travels that the thing that they thought was worse than pets was children.
Well, you can't discriminate.
Right, I know, but
So, honestly, that's not even a consideration for me necessarily because I can't discriminate, right?
Right.
So it doesn't matter to me if you have kids or not. If you're a landlord and that's an aversion you have in general as a human and or as a landlord, then I'd say buy 1-bedrooms.
Yeah.
because you have to have bedrooms for the certain number of people.
Right.
Right. So that's another thing. You want to familiarize yourself with the local codes
Right.
and what do they allow. Right. So, for example, one of the towns where I have rental properties, they don't necessarily consider a walk-through bedroom a bedroom because it doesn't have a door, it doesn't close, and it doesn't have a closet.
Right.
So that
Space.
that borough won't consider that. So if I advertise it, if I can call it that if I want to, but they won't consider it that. So, okay. So we talked about location, allowing for pets and taking that into consideration. And how do you figure that into your calculation? So, for example, if we're going to allow pets, which I just told you I'm going to, flooring, right? I got to consider, what am I putting in here? Am I putting carpet in? Because guess what? What happens on carpet?
Yeah, puppy dogs and
Yeah.
pussycats.
Yes.
And children.
Yes. Very hard to get it out, right?
Yeah.
So it's easier if you have, vinyl plank.
Yeah.
Right? So
That's why I love that stuff.
yes. I mean, I think it's changed the game in housing across the board. Yeah. So given that they have potentially kids and a pet, they likely want a yard.
Right.
Right? So is there a yard there? Is it fenced? That's even better still.
Yeah.
So if it has a fenced yard, that's even more palatable to a renter.
Okay.
So I'll tell you, the first question that I used to always get is, what kind of heat does it have? If they haven't read, because I put everything in my advertisement, but if they'll ask that question, what kind of heat? Because I'll tell you why renters don't love oil heat. Do you know why?
Because it runs out.
It does run out. That's right.
Yeah.
And then if you have to get it, it's a very big bill, right? It's a very big bill.
Incredibly expensive.
Yes.
From the landlord's perspective, too, an oil heater is just horrible to maintain.
Yeah.
It's old technology. Even the newest ones, they're brand new and shiny, and the valves and everything in there is newer, and it's got a little computer in it, but it's still 100-year-old technology at the end of the day. It hasn't evolved the way gas and electric has.
Right. And so, again, we're talking about people who may not be the best money managers. So now you're saying to them, okay, you need oil. Well, that's $750 to $1,200 potentially, depending on how much they need, how big the tank is, things like that. Well, imagine yourself getting the the wake-up call, I'll tell you how one of my tenants got it. They never lived in a house that had oil.
Yeah.
And she was taking a shower, and she said all of a sudden the water got cold, and she thought, "Wonder why the water's cold." Well, because the hot water was generated from the oil-burning furnace,
Yeah.
and she ran out of oil. So
Yeah.
now she had no hot water as well as no heat. And so that was her learning lesson around this is what happens when you don't pay attention, is because you have to look, right? It's manual. You got to go downstairs and look
Right.
into the tank. It's at the tank gauge, and am I running out? So besides the money issue, it's a maintenance issue. You got to pay attention.
Yeah.
And so that's why most renters don't want oil. So when I'm looking at a house as a whole, if it has oil, I'm not saying I won't buy it, because especially in certain places, some people don't have as much of an aversion to it.
Mhm.
So I can get away with it for a little bit, but I'm looking at, can I convert this over, or when can I change this out
Right.
to gas? Because that is the preference, right? People want an approximately same bill every single month so they know what their costs are and it doesn't upset their lifestyle.
And at this time, gas is almost free in a lot of areas. It's just really, really, really inexpensive,
It's much
comparatively
more affordable.
speaking, to oil or electric.
Yes. Yes.
Although electric is becoming more and more popular, there are places that won't allow for gas, and then you end up with having to convert everything to electric.
Right.
And that electric heaters have come a long way too. I
Yeah.
remember in the 70s and 80s, electric heat was unbelievably expensive. Now it's very reasonable.
So electric heat means more than one thing, right? So
Yeah.
an electric baseboard heating system is still quite expensive for
Right.
people. That's literally like turning a toaster on in your living room. And that's quite expensive to run. But a heat pump, which I'm
Right.
assuming is what you're referring
Right.
to, which blows warm air, hot air,
Yeah.
and cool air, preferably if you have a central air system, those are more affordable. Now, one of the reasons that I think, weren't as popular here is because it gets so cold here. And once it gets below, I say here, we're in the Northeast. So
Right.
once it gets below 20 degrees, a heat pump is really struggling to keep up. Right. So that's the negative of a heat pump. But, I have a heat pump in my house and it manages. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's okay. I think it's preferable. So yeah. So electric and gas are preferable over oil for sure for renters.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So we covered location. What kind of heat does it have? Is there a yard? Do they have a place to park? The other thing is, can they do their laundry? Is there a washer and dryer there? Or is there at least a hookup there, right?
Right.
They're looking for things that are convenient and functional, right? Again, it kind of comes back to this home has to be functional and it has to be durable, because sometimes when things aren't our own, we don't care for them in the same way. So as a landlord, I want to make sure that I've purchased something and made it durable. So the way in which I'm looking at it is different than the way in which you were maybe necessarily looking at it to flip it, because you don't have to worry about whether or not they take care of the countertops or the floors, because you're going to sell it to them and move on.
Right.
Right.
Right. So I want to make it look appealing.
Right.
And for lack of a better term, as pretty as possible.
That's right.
Whereas you're looking for making something as durable and long lasting as possible.
Yes.
Without going broke.
Buy and hold is function. And I think buy and flip is fashion, right? Because as a realtor, when I take a buyer in and they see a newly rehabbed house, you can see the stars in their eyes when you open the door.
Right.
They just love that fresh new look.
Yeah.
And so whether you put a $20 faucet in or a $200 faucet in, doesn't matter to them. They aren't even concerned with that. They're just googly-eyed over the fresh new everything.
Right.
Yeah. Where, I may not put a $20 faucet in and I probably won't put a $200 faucet in as landlord, but I'm going to put maybe an $80 one in there. It's not the best one, but it's not the cheapest one either, or I'm fixing that in a year.
And it's not about beauty. It's about lasting.
Correct.
Lasting a long time. So
Yeah.
Again, we're back to dating versus marriage.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you're really looking at a rental as if you are going to give it to a renter. You are not looking at a buy and hold as I'm going to flip this. It needs to be as pretty as possible. It does need to be attractive. It does matter to me that my rental properties are attractive to people.
Mhm.
My rule is, and I can promise you there are other landlords that don't feel this way, but my rule is I would be willing to live in my rental. I'm
Mhm.
not saying I want to, but I would be willing to. So it's nice enough, clean enough, not in a terrible location
Mhm.
with regard to,
Neighborhoods and what have you, yeah.
yes. So I absolutely, and I'm pretty particular, one might say, if you know me personally. So, yeah, so that's kinda it's just a different perspective of how you look at purchasing. So when you go to view the property, besides what you have to improve, you are looking at it from, "Okay, think about this 5 years from now. How well is this floor gonna look in 5 years? How good is this countertop gonna look in 5 years? Are there appliances already there, or do I gotta put appliances in?" And things like that. That's the other thing. When you did your flip, you were talking about a suite of appliances, and this
Yeah.
is how much it costs, and they're all gonna match. Well, I'm not. I have bought I go to Restore, which is you know what Restore is?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Restore is a Habitat for Humanity store
Mhm.
where they get extra stuff. People donate stuff.
Yeah.
And that's an awesome place to get a used stove, right? So I can, or I'll buy it off of Facebook. I don't need a brand new stove for my rental property. I just need a good stove in good condition. And so I can spend $50 on a stove where you might be spending $600 on a stove, right?
Correct, yes,
So there are
absolutely.
big differences with regard to what those considerations are. And so I feel like this is a good place to kind of maybe break. At least we talked about what it is, how you perceive the property for a renter
Right.
when you're shopping and those types of things that you're taking into consideration. So I feel like this is a good place to
Take a
wrap up
pause?
this one
Yes,
and come back to the next one and talk about what does the rehab look like.
absolutely. Until then, I'm Ed Marko.
And I'm Kim Von Dohren.
You have been listening to Brick by Brick. Be sure and subscribe, post questions for future episodes, or comment. This is a Super Squirrel production, Super Squirrel Studios, Stony Creek Mills, Pennsylvania.